Is that how we're doing it, man? What's up, beautiful?
What up, everybody? Welcome to a brand new episode of Mocast. We are getting into the nitty-gritty with all of the specs currently and touching a little bit on the past as well. Maybe in the future, who knows? But man, do we have a special one today.
Oh, we finally have the first healing spec, right? This is the first healer podcast that we've done.
Yes.
Obviously, you've read the title. It's about Discipline Priest, which is it's a very.
Yeah, let's see who portray this purpose. Come on, maybe.
I feel like I'm on the verge of digging myself a specific grave. It's actually one of the specs that I grew up admiring as well, because I always thought like, oh my god, this is the spec that I don't get how to heal.
But which version?
Well, that was in the olden days when it was mostly about absorbs, if I recall.
The bubbly, Well, we'll get into
now it's like a totally different business, actually.
But we have a couple of great people from the Warcraft Priest Discord channel. Theory crafters, big brains, experienced people who get much more information and experience on Discipline Priest with us today. We have Clandon. We have
Smallpriest.
And Smallpriest. And I'll let randomly the folks talk a little bit about themselves, and then we can get into it.
Yeah, so I'm Clandon. I write the Ice Veins guide on Disc Priest. I've been playing Disc for a little while here now, but I've been playing WoW for casually since vanilla, but more competitively since the last 3 expansions or so. I currently raid an Incarnate, which if you don't know, we're, world 40 something, or 44, I think.
Pretty good.
So I play the game a decent amount.
What about you, Hell Priesto?
Well, yeah, I'm Hell Priesto. I'm an admin over at Warcraft Priest Discord. I manage the guides that we have on the website there, and I do a big bulk of our theory crafting. I've been playing the game since around Wrath, I believe. I'm mostly playing it competitively since, I would say, Warlords of Draenor. So I've played a good amount, and I play at the sort of top level as I can.
Awesome.
All right.
And the last one to make the presentation.
I'm Smallpriest. I'm from Germany, and I am also a part of the Disc team of the Warcraft Priest Discord. I've actually not been playing WoW for too long compared to most people, I guess. I only started playing very end of Draenor, and then stopped again and started again during Tomb of Sargeras. And really only in BFA I started playing Discipline Priest, but ever since then I kind of just never really stopped with it and just stuck with it, and then joined the Warcraft Priest team towards the end of BFA, I guess sometimes in Nyalotha farm. And I currently raid in Security since this tier only, and been having a good time there.
We got to give thanks to the boys, especially for joining in and giving the opportunity to talk about Priest, but also for the work they put in for the Discipline Priest, I would say, community, like people who are interested in the spec, trying to learn it, trying to get more in depth with it. It's the website too. I know we got a lot of super valuable information, because if you don't know, there's warcraftpriest.com as well, apart from the class Discord. Not all the classes, the specs actually, and classes have websites. I know monks have
not all.
Peak of Serenity and what was it? Tank notes, but that's more tank in general.
Well, as far as anything Discipline Priest links and everything, we will find them down in the description.
Oh make sure to check it out.
With the context for everybody, where you can find everybody as well. But let's kick it off now that everybody said a couple of words. With we usually like to ask you guys, based on what expansions you've played so far, what was the best version of Discipline Priest that you guys played, that you guys thought was the most fun or maybe most effective or anything like that? What expansion that was, and maybe elaborate a little bit on the why. And I think we can start with Smallpriest and go the other way around this time.
Yeah, sure. Well, since I said I haven't played that much before, I guess I don't have too much experience on how it used to be. I know how it used to play in Legion, and I really regret not having played it a lot in Taurus and Tomb of Sargeras, because it does seem like a very fun spec back then, but I sadly didn't get too much into it. As far as what I have played and what was my favorite, I think I'd have to say I liked it most in Nyalotha, with all the extra stuff and the corruption. It really felt pretty nice to play during that time, I have to admit. Pretty much just Nyalotha, and I mean, it didn't change too much during BFA, right? So it's the same for most of the time.
Yeah, well, for me, I can't really look at a time back in the past where Disc has not been brought to a raid because it's performed well. So it's always done good. But gameplay-wise, I think how it plays currently is the way I'd see it best in terms of you got your big bolt set up with atonements and you burst it out with healing afterwards. But I think the best iteration of that was towards the end of Legion, as we've seen a lot of sort of progression towards nerfing everything of the spec past that point.
Oh, yeah.
And before that, we had Warlords of Draenor, which was just spamming Powered Shield. And then Mist before that was a smarter atonement with Spirit Shell.
It's interesting that I see a pattern here. Like most people tend to go for the best iteration of specs so far in Legion. Actually, it's interesting, but we'll develop more onto it for sure. What about you, Clandon? How do you see the best iteration of Disc?
I'm definitely on the same boat here. I think when the spec got the rework that it got in Legion, specifically the second half of after the patch that hit in Nighthold, that iteration we've had since then, it really hasn't changed much since then. I mean, now this expansion we have the addition of Spirit Shell, which most people don't like, myself including. But outside of that, even with the addition of Spirit Shell, the overall core of the spec plays pretty much the same. And I do agree that I think that's the best version of Disc that I've seen so far.
Beautiful. I was about to ask you guys in terms of like the whole attunement mechanic, and more or less dealing damage to heal. I hope I'm not mistaken. When was this actually properly introduced? Was this in WoD? What did the attunement? Because I remember at least up until Cataclysm, the spec was known more for the shield, spamming the shields more or less, and it wasn't that particularly doing damage and stuff. Do you guys like the actual version of it in the sense that it does more damage and more healing like this, or was this something like interesting back then where it was only like quote unquote the shieldy spec in terms of like the healers?
Yeah, I don't think any of us are really going to say that we like shield spamming, one button spam kind of specs, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
I definitely don't like that.
I was going to say that even disregarding the whole adding DPS as Disc, I think I just prefer the playstyle where you don't just press one button or like spam shields or something. Doesn't sound too interesting to me. Even if like Disc wouldn't actually do DPS but just cast the DPS spells or something, I still wouldn't mind that. I just like how it plays.
Yeah, I think it's unanimously accepted that the version of the current, present, and modern attunement on making sure, because it's different, right? It's like the proper healer that you would have in the game that would actually make its numbers based off more or less a damage rotation, right? It's and I know now we have Holy Paladins who do that, and we talked about Mistweaver Monk, with face weaving and stuff, but the actual damage dealing healer was always Discipline. I mean, at least in my eyes, I always saw like that. That was like the staple of Discipline Priest, right?
Well, as far as generally kill, I mean, you're compared it to Mistweaver and Holy Paladin. This guy actually has the atonement as a passive, while with Mistweaver and Holy Paladin, although it's the best, you opt to go into the damage dealing playstyles, while with Discipline you don't really have a choice. And I don't know. I actually kind of like it as well. It feels a little bit more interesting. And when I played it for the first time, I was like, oh, this is an interesting take on a healer. It was really, really cool.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like it's the OG, I would say, of the healing, the damaging and healing, right? That's the thing. Like in terms of like how the talent row is looking right now. I'm pretty sure you guys have some strong opinions about this, but would you see like a possible, I don't know, rework, or is there any talent you would like completely scrap or change?
Definitely would like to see Spirit Shell taken off that tier there.
Wow. Okay, we can talk about this. So I can feel that Spirit Shell is I wouldn't say hated, but why? Like, what's it like in your
It's one of those cases where it's very much simplified how you play the spec on every single boss, at the same time as making other healers not like you as much. It was the exact same problem when it was back in Mists. It was the same issue. It was just too strong for an absorb.
Yeah, it's just a giant balance nightmare in general. You know, we always used to use Spirit Shell every time people were talking about spec design and all that. We always used to use Spirit Shell as a perfect example of, you know, poor design in regards to the healer ecosystem, and then they decided to bring it back. So, and like Kel said, you know, we've got a very simplified version of Disc now, where in previous expansions with this playstyle, you had a lot more different cooldown, timer cooldowns to juggle around. So you had your Rapture, you had your Evangelism, you had Shadow Fiend on a different timer. It was a more interesting playstyle. With Spirit Shell now, everything's on a 1 minute timer, right? You're running Mindbender, which is a 1 minute timer. You're running Spirit Shell, which is a 1 minute timer. You throw in a 1 minute timer trinket, you macro them all together, and then you just find the first damage mechanic in a fight, and then you just use everything on cooldown. It's a much more simplified, boring version of the spec.
It definitely doesn't help that, especially this tier is also very much timer based around that time span. Like, a lot of bosses just fit very well for the 1 minute timer, so you're already making the right choice with playing a 1 minute based playstyle for most of the bosses anyway, disregarding that it's also Spirit Shell.
Right. Yeah, like look at the last 4 bosses or so of the instance. You know, you look at like Sire, you've got Blood Price, which is a 1 minute apart mechanic that involves CCing you, so you can't be healing during it. So you just Spirit Shell before and it covers it. You look at Stone Legion Generals, you've got Crystallize every 1 minute. So it, you know, lines up again with Spirit Shell, and it CCs half the raid during it while they're clearing bleeds. So once again, you just Spirit Shell beforehand. You look at Sludge Fist, he hits a pillar every minute. So you just, you know, it's like, for some reason, it was a perfect storm of them adding back this mechanic and at the same time designing the raid around 1 minute mechanics.
I think it's a lot to do with how they actually make the encounters, or made for, at least for this tier. But is it a different story in Mythic Plus though?
Yeah, I mean
people are not playing Spirit Shell. I haven't seen much.
Yeah.
There's a couple of logs I've seen, but not really that much. Depends.
Yeah, Spirit Shell is not something you generally pick for in Plus, because it, after all, well, after 9.05 now, it not only doesn't increase your healing, it actually just decreases your healing and turns it into shielding. And especially on, well, only 5 targets, compared to Rapture, which you lose when you pick Spirit Shell, it's just a straight up healing loss actually pressing it for the both scenarios. And especially in M Plus, where it's kind of unusual that you have, well, group-wide burst damage that you need to mitigate completely like you would do in raids with Spirit Shell. It's just not good compared to Rapture even, and that's like with ignoring that you have another talent you could pick.
Yeah, but maybe in specific affixes, I don't know, maybe in bursting or something that would scale up and add more and more damage. I would think of maybe, you know, Pride with some affixes turned on. They could possibly see happening, but now it's just.
Yeah, it like before we got to play it, it was talked about that obviously it could have some niche where maybe some boss would on a high key was like almost one-shotting you with stuff, and you could survive it a lot more easily with Spirit Shell, but that didn't really happen anywhere. And for stuff like Pride, if your Spirit Shell can help you through it, then Atonement, which just heals more than Spirit Shell, could do so too.
Yeah, true. Very, very true. Okay, we get with the Spirit Shell. So that was let's say problematic in the past. They brought it back, and I definitely saw, you know, quote unquote a little bit of hate from other healers.
I don't know, man. Personally, I like lenience way too much. I don't know. I feel like it's one of the more interesting things I got to do when I played Discipline in raids. It's just I don't know. It feels nice.
Yeah, but
By lenience, do you mean Evangelism?
Oh my God, yes, Evangelism. I was like the whole time.
I was thinking lenience is the 3% thing.
Yeah, no,
It's definitely like lenience is not interesting at all.
I was actually thinking about the lenience the whole time with the M plus argument, and then I was like, oh yeah, lenience is in rage. Yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah, I was processing the interesting parts, like the 3% extra. Oh.
Nah, it's Evangelism because it's a similar feel with Resto Druid Nourish, which is another reason why I like Resto Druid in raids. It's just by setting up like for a big event and then just spreading that event. You know, the more efficient you are, the better you are prepared. It feels like it's very rewarding when you can just do that right. I haven't played a lot with Spirit Shell this expansion, but yeah, I'm guessing it's definitely not that interesting if it actually is the answer to pretty much everything.
I mean, it has its, I would say, satisfaction element because you see those meters, right? I'm sorry,
True.
It's there. I might as well use it.
The moments where your raid leader goes, "Did we take damage there? What happened?" You get that a lot.
But okay, so I pretty clear with the spirit shell. Is there any other talent that you guys would look on or maybe change on this priest?
Yeah, Small, you want to go through the list of all our dead talents in our talent tree?
Oh boy,
There's a list.
Got a couple.
All right,
Got a couple.
all
I mean, I think on most tiers you could argue for a lot of talents that need some look or like
love.
yeah, definitely. Like in the first tier we have Schism, Twist of Fate, and then we have Castigation. Schism and Twist of Fate are pretty nice, and I guess they're kind of decently balanced at the moment where you pick them for different scenarios, which is nice. I mean, it was kind of the same case in BFA where Schism was still a bit stronger and also saw more play in M+ compared to now. But Castigation, at least for PvE, has been pretty dead for 2 expansions now. I'm not experienced in PvP at all, so I don't want to say that it's bad there too. I don't know about that, but
used to be good
for
in
PvE at least, it's not even comparable to Twist of Fate or Schism, for example.
What would you think would make Castigation more competitive then? Do you think it's a tweaking situation or something completely different?
I've mentioned this before where I feel like they do like this whole mechanic where Penance gets more bolts. That's why we have Castigation, and that's why we have the Legendary, the Penitent one, which can add 3 bolts. But on the other hand, there's no... what I would wish for is that our conduit kind of, like the potency conduit we have for Penance, kind of interacted with the amount of bolts we had. Because currently, all it does is increase the damage of the first bolt. But I would wish for some kind of scaling to actually have something from gaining more bolts, except just gaining more bolts. Like, you can pick Castigation and you can pick Penitent one, and neither of them buff each other in any way. And same for the Conduit. Like, they don't make the other one better, even though they're all buffing the same spell.
All in the meanwhile, you look at Penance, its damage and healing baseline is pretty low overall compared to what you'd gain from either Twist of Fate or Schism. So it just loses out completely.
I think a lot of people actually like if you play Castigation, it does look cool and it feels good when Penance shoots really fast. Like, that's not the issue. People kind of want to have Castigation as a talent and play it because it kind of just feels nice, but it's just quite inferior.
I mean, and also like you know, Smallpriest said it's I think of like nothing really synergizes. Like, you know, you take the Penitent one, there's
like
no
a little
synergy.
bit like a wet blanket.
I think it's a missed opportunity there for sure because you know, this was pointed out quite clear. I think Penance is one of the most cool looking abilities, period.
Yeah,
it's a community favorite for such a long time, right? It's cool, it looks cool, it feels good, and you pointed out exactly, I think people really want it, but it's just shit.
There's definitely a few iconic spells in regards to Disc that people really think of right away. You know, you think of Disc, you think Penance, you think Power Word Shield, and we're kind of like in a very unfortunate situation where all of the iconic spells are kind of in a really bad situation and from a tuning perspective. So, you know, like Hel said, the numbers on Penance are pretty abysmal in general. So, you know, we use it because it's just, you know, stronger than a Smite, so we're not just going to Smite instead. But it's not this big impactful spell in any way. So you know, it's kind of unfortunate that we have, you know, 2 talents, a Legendary, a Conduit, all affecting Penance, no synergy between any of them, and it's just kind of tuned poorly. It's not a very impactful spell.
What about Shadow Covenant?
Wasn't I don't know. I've always felt nice using Shadow Covenant. I know it was had some plays at the end of BFA or even through 8.2 if I recall correctly.
I think there were a couple of patches where it worked. I think in BFA. I don't know if it's still the thing.
So Shadow Covenant got a rework going into, well, I say rework. It's similar, but it's a little different now, going into Shadowlands. So previously, you would cast Shadow Covenant, it would heal 5 people, and then it would put this absorb on people for half the value that you healed. So it kind of had this, you know, get a bunch now and then lose a bunch later kind of aspect.
Yeah.
It doesn't do the absorb anymore. So what it now does is it heals the 5 targets just like before, and then gives you this buff for the I think it's 9 seconds.
Yeah.
that increases your shadow damage and healing by 25%, which sounds nice. However, during that 9 seconds, you're completely locked out of holy spells. So we really thought it sounded interesting and there could be some cool play. We loved the design of it going into the tier, or going into the expansion, but we weren't really considering it for raid. It was mostly interesting for M+, for the most part. It originally got some talk back when Kiss of Death, one of our legendaries, was very strong during the beta cycles, before that got killed on arrival. So our conversations were mostly in regards to M+, but it just turns out that the downsides, the utility that you get locked out of during that 9 seconds is too big of a risk for the minor reward you get from Shadow Covenant, because the benefit isn't all that big for the risk of being locked out of things like Dispel for 9 seconds. You know, not being able to dispel somebody for 9 seconds can be very dangerous. There's just a handful of very important utilities that you're locked out of that the risk versus reward just isn't worth it.
Further to Clandon's point there, it also has anti-synergy with the main talent we run for Mythic Plus, which is Purge the Wicked. That's a fire spell, so it wouldn't get increased by the shadow buff.
How does it affect atonement managing? Because I can see you can still probably spread atonement with Shadow Mend, but
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
Yeah, that's all you can do during that time, yeah.
Generally speaking, I mean, I think that wouldn't be too bad because you just atonement before and then press Shadow Covenant after, and then go into DPS rotation. But usually, I mean, we even have the Shadow, or like most Disc Priests play Venthyr, right? So we have Mind Games, which is a Shadow spell. But even with that, we still only have Schism, Mind Games, and Mind Blast as our main Shadow spells, and then we can use Mind Seer, which ends up not being even a lot more healing than just your normal rotation would be.
Yeah, even with Shadow Covenant on, you're still kind of just Mind Searing for damage, not healing. You know, it doesn't really do much for our healing outside of Shadow Covenanting into Shadowman spam. Basically, that's really what you would be looking at. If you're not doing that, you're kind of looking to, you could Radiant Shadow Covenant Mind Games and then start Shadowman spamming. But you know, you would kind of be looking to use it for DPS purposes instead of healing purposes.
Right, and you mentioned Mind Games being played by most Disciplined Priest. I'm not sure what 9.1 holds in store when, as far as covenants are concerned, but is there a chance that more covenants can become balanced in 9.1? Maybe we'll see, because I know that Shadow likes.
I like Boon of the Ascended a lot when I play my Disc.
Personally, I was always attracted to Boon of the Ascended. I felt like that looked really cool. Although I don't know. Initially, when I played with it on beta, it was a little bit weird with this. I don't know if it had any atonement interaction at all. I don't know if they've changed that now. But outside of that, it felt really only good for Holy. I don't know how it feels for Splinter now, or if there's any changes to it in 9.1.
It was pretty good for Mythic Plus. I know that the guys can correct me, but I know Mind Games is like, you know, more teamed prefer and stuff, and especially you take Mind Games obviously for more single target, but I think Boon was really good for like just burst AoEing and stuff, because you just spam it. And you can also use it on a single target. Wasn't this like the main choice for Mythic Plus, guys, or am I mistaken?
Yeah, Boon is still our recommendation for Mythic Plus. The reason why you see most people go Venthyr is because it's our raid recommendation.
Yeah.
So a lot of people just go Venthyr for raid, and then just obviously they can't switch covenants, so they just are still Venthyr and M+. But anybody that's going primarily M+, the recommendation would be to use Boon. I think the other big part of it is that, you know, the difference between Boon and Mind Games and M+ is a lot smaller than the difference between Mind Games and Boon and Raid. So if you're trying to do both pieces of content, the general recommendation would be to go for the Raid one, and then, you know, you're less handicapped in M+ than you would be the other way around.
Yeah.
It probably also helps that Venthyr is kind of an underrepresented covenant for most M+ meta classes. So most teams are kind of lacking a Venthyr. So having that for those, is it sinful? Revendreth. For the Revendreth dungeons is very helpful because, if you don't have a Holy Paladin, you really don't have a lot of Venthyrs left.
Yeah, indeed. Most tanks see Kirian as well, so maybe going Kirian has less value overall.
That too.
No, but I feel, also, the Mind Games is really, really good in PvP too. And since we had the beginning, explosion of PvP gearing, especially at the beginning of the season when most progression guilds would go do PvP for their weapons, like you cannot take Boon into PvP, it's worthless when compared to Mind Games. So that was an aspect too of it for sure. But I don't know. I mean, I love playing with Mind Games, but that was again something played more in arenas and stuff. But in Mythic Plus, I love Boom. It felt like something Discipline didn't really have. And you can spam Holy Nova or whatever, but that doesn't do the trick. Boon is just like everywhere. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, Boon gives you a very nice cooldown, which gives you a lot of sort of upfront healing when you need it, which is the best thing about it. Going into 9.1, it could see a bunch of nice quality of life changes to make it more, to flow with the way you play a bit more. For instance, when you're casting it, you have to activate it first for 1.5 seconds, and then you can start casting what you want from it. As well as it's got a different global cooldown timer compared to all of your other spells. So it sort of desyncs itself. It's a bit odd.
You mentioned 9.1. I guess we can get into it a little bit. Hello, past Marcelian and Flame and Clandon and Hell Priesto. This is future Marcelian and Flame and Clandon and Hell Priesto, and we got some brand new information about the legendaries on this breed. So we're cutting this shit out, and then we're gonna pass it over to the past boys.
Yeah, so the thing is, guys, when we recorded the initial podcast, we didn't really have any information about the legendaries, right?
Yeah, but now we do have it now. We'll not stumble too much on it. I will get right into it because I read in between them, and with both Clandon's and El Priesto's permission, I would like to start it off with the Kirian Covenant legendary, which I'm really curious on what you guys think about it. It basically reduces the cooldown of Boon of the Ascended to 2 minutes, if I'm not mistaken, based on the stacks you get from Boon of the Ascended. Now, first question, and then we can add from this. Is this still gonna remain the main choice for Mythic Plus on this priest?
I would assume so, yeah. When you've got more uses of the big cooldown, I imagine it makes it more impactful to be a disc priest with a Kirian and that legendary at the same time. It'll be
especially with its only competition, Twins is the primary legendary for M+ right now anyway, and there really aren't any other options, and Twins it's okay in certain situations, but it's definitely not some super impactful, amazing legendary for M+. So having something like this that, like Hel said, you just get more uses of a very impactful cooldown, it has a lot of potential for M+.
And at the same time, there's also, I think there's a conduit, the new ones coming out. They will also reduce the cooldown. So you just have cooldown reduction on top of cooldown reduction. So you get even less, or more uses rather.
Yeah. Yeah, the Forge Light Prime on the Kirian Soulbind, their new capstone Soulbind ability on him is more cooldown reduction. So you could potentially get it to be a pretty low cooldown.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe somewhere around the range of a minute and a half, something like that. Would that be a reality in 9.1?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the maximum potential cooldown was on that Soulbind, but I think depending on how it lines up, because one of them's based on number of targets hit, the other one's based on number of stacks of Boon. So depending on how it all lines up, I mean, you could look for anywhere between a minute to 2 minute cooldown.
I think this really completes a little bit the discussion we had with our past selves regarding the quote unquote problems with this priest in AoE, because we kind of agreed upon that Boon is basically, covering a gap where you need a lot of burst healing, burst AoE healing, and that really covered it up. Now having more fast access to it, I guess it further solves that problem. I mean, it's still borrowed power, but
Yeah, I'm trying to think to put this a little bit into perspective as to what 1.5 minute or 2 minutes mean. It sounds like you could use it. You could use it in between prides and have it for pride still. If that's ever a problem, but because I can see we've done a couple of keys. Doing keys with Discipline on Grievous is a little bit tough, and I don't know if on high key prides Discipline struggles with keeping everybody Grievous free, but I can see that Boon can counteract that, and similar mechanics where everybody's just taking AoE loads of damage. And the only thing that comes to mind is Pride. But obviously, we're not gonna have Pride in the next patch.
So
but maybe similar mechanics can be counteracted by this kind of stuff. I don't know what you guys think.
We'll see.
Yeah, but I mean, just if you hit around a minute and a half-ish on that cooldown, being able to just cycle between Rapture and Boon every other pack or every pack or something like that, it's quite the extra power.
Yeah, not trying to get overly excited about it, but it does feel that the cycling of cooldowns with this reduced cooldown boon will definitely make this priest at least, I don't know, in perception-wise, a much better looked at healing spec for M+.
Personally, I think I like this kind of design for any type of spec because it feels like it gives you a little bit more freedom to approach different packs. Because if you think about it, Holy Paladin plays similarly, at least Kirian Holy Paladin plays similarly, where you want to rotate cooldowns when you don't have wings, you want to rotate Auto Mastery and Divine Toll and all of that kind of stuff.
That's true, but they don't have to rotate Ashen Hallow on 5 minutes, right?
That's what I'm saying, man, because it's Kirian. That's what keeps them, I feel like it keeps them being able to deal with a lot of stuff. So maybe Holy Priest, Discipline Priest, Jesus, can have like more access to really good tools.
Okay, here's one nugget for you, Mr. Flame, and I'm pretty sure the boys already know. So I want to move it over to the vent here, Covenant Legendary, which so here the thing with
if
the
you're
vent,
telling me Mind Games is gonna be AOE,
Mind Games gain extra charge, so they will have 2 charges, but the cast time will be increased to 50%. Can you guys elaborate a bit on this? What's your stance on this one?
So to begin with, it doesn't look that amazing in sort of all areas of content. Like the longer cast times, it's not terrible, but it definitely doesn't feel good with the base cast already being relatively long. But you're always still going to be cycling through 1 charge of Mind Games. You use your additional 1 at the start, and then you're going to be still cycling through that singular charge. So you're not gaining that much while still having a longer cast time. There's the thought that in Mythic Plus it might be useful because you can pull your background charge while using the first one, and then have that other one as a backup for when you need it, which is something you can really need at that point, basically.
That's what I was going to cycle through. Maybe this will be a potential option for Mythic Plus?
Potentially, yeah. It definitely looks like it's okay. Within raids, it's going to need a little bit of sort of looking at and testing. My initial thoughts are it's not going to be amazing. You can combine Evangelism or Spirit Shell with a double Mind Games cast, which might have some use on a certain boss, but that's to be seen.
That's what I was thinking as well. If and I don't know all of the bosses yet that we're going to be having in the Sanctum, but if there's like a cleave boss, is there a reason why you would want this like double Mind Games on both of the targets? Would that even be something worth taking a legendary slot?
If there's those bosses do healing, potentially, yeah. If they both heal them at each other, you can get healing reversal on both targets, which might be really strong.
Let's not forget what Mind Games does, it's pretty good.
Then the only issue with that is it comes down to, it's probably going to add to more overhealing unless the fight has got insane damage at that point.
I mean, on the cleave thing, the only issue with cleaving like that is that means you're also throwing one of those Mind Games into a non-schism to target, which is a little unfortunate considering the majority of the healing comes from the atonement part of it. But yeah, I mean, like Kel said, it definitely it looks like it has more potential on the evangelism side than the spirit shell side, just because COM is, Clarity of Mind is lower valued for evangelism than it is for spirit shell. But as he had mentioned, you're not getting much actual value out of it. It's more giving you the ability to move around where those mind games are being used. So it opens up the potential of those evangelism into double mind games rotations. Whereas previously you would be using, your first charge on your rapture ramp and then your second charge on your evangelism ramp. So whether it gets seen really comes down to the fight's damage patterns and timings. But it yet to be seen, but has potential, but not much.
It will remain to be seen, what people will go for, at least in Mythic Plus, because Boon is also really, really powerful from the looks of it now. We'll see how things change further down the line. But now, the last two legendaries for the Necros and the Night Phase, I didn't really make much sense out of them. I'm hoping the boys can maybe clear the air a little bit. I think the Necro one on Holy Nova, it it spawns a mob or something that increases the heal and damage or something. I didn't really understand it because I was like right before this. Maybe you guys have some more light to shed on the Necro one.
Yeah, it really, the Necrolord one is really going to be one that has to be tested to really see what it's doing. Because those are more data mined legendaries, they're not implemented.
Yeah.
So we haven't gotten a chance to get our hands on it yet and actually mess with it. So it's a little difficult to see what it's going to do. But looking at the Necrolord one and looking at the Night Fae one, with how bad those covenants are for disc in all content, it's highly unlikely that either of those legendaries are going to be even remotely enough to make us consider using either of those covenants. We'll definitely be taking a look at them for people that do use those with disc, because there's plenty of people out there that do use non-meta covenants.
Of course.
So we'll have a better answer once we can actually try those on if they're viable for the people that are going to use those. But yeah, the Necrolord one is a little interesting. We'll have to see what the Maldraxxi champion does when he's summoned, because it does mention increasing healing and damage, but we're not really sure what its cast profile looks like, if it's single target healing, AoE healing, etc.
There was a Maldraxxi champion.
Right. I knew something was wrong.
All right. So basically, there's still it's early days still, I would believe, on 9.1 testing. It's good that finally Discipline got their versions right. Some data mine or not, we still have a glimpse on what to look forward to. And testing is to be made once things are more available, because right now PTR is a goddamn mess. They showed tooltips on stuff, but not really work.
I tried testing a couple of stuff myself, and I couldn't really do it successfully. So I don't know exactly how people are addressing PTR right now.
That being said, I think we can conclude it to this. I think we can go back to our past Marcelian Flame, Clandon, and Hellpriesto, and Smallpriest, because we forgot Smallpriest couldn't make it to the future.
Couldn't make it into the future because he had work to do, not because. Never mind.
Or if Clandon or Hellpriesto, do you guys want anything to be added to this, or want to say something more on this? Just shoot it out.
The Night Fae one is confirmed. It's basically when you use Shadow of Death and take damage from that, your Fae Guardians will have their effectiveness increased by 25%.
Yeah.
So it's just doubling down on what it already does, but you have to then take damage yourself to activate the additional component.
Right.
Oh well.
Well, as Clandon said, that's most, not being too pessimistic here, but most probably people are going to stick to Venthyr and probably Kirian for their stuff. Who knows? We'll have to see. But thank you, future Clandon and future Hellpriesto. Now we are gonna throw it back to a past Clandon and Hellpriesto and Smallpriest and Flame Marcelian.
All right.
Back to you.
This is a question that I wanted to ask, not specifically to Discipline Priest, but obviously to Priest as a whole, but since we're talking about Discipline here. Obviously, a big value to having a Priest in a dungeon is power infusion, especially if you're training into a spec like Fire Mage or anything like that. We can definitely talk about this and ask different types of questions from different perspectives, but to make it a little bit broad and maybe like funnel into the discussion, what do you guys think of power infusion being added a baseline to this spec? And kind of, I don't know, I feel like sometimes you want a priest because power infusion and maybe not as much what the kit can bring.
Being brought back.
might be wrong.
I'm pretty indifferent on power infusion being back. I know some people like it, some people don't. It doesn't really bother me. It's nice having the extra utility built into the class for people that want to bring us specifically because we bring power infusion. I'm having a lot of fun selling it to my guildies in raid because they want to parse.
Wait, like legit selling?
Oh yeah. Every day during raid, hey, I'll give you 100K if you PI me all day.
No way.
Hey man, that's a switch to your gold issues.
Yeah. I should make that happen for sure. No, I think power infusion was. At least when I was thinking about Discipline Priest, the part of the unproning of that was I would say a win. If they have headaches on balancing it because some other classes have big ass benefits and everybody's like cheesing for it or whatever, that's their problem. I think power infusion was a staple of Priest, and I don't see any problem with it whatsoever. I think Clandon underlined it pretty well. Maybe you guys can see, I don't know, some any different spells that they could have brought back for Discipline Priest? I know you said you're not fans of bringing the old priest back, but maybe specific things?
I think the general opinion right now is that we have a ton of buttons right now, and we've got a lot of buttons that are kind of doing, you know, we like to joke about how many smites but better we have at the moment in our rotation, where it's kind of like, you know, there's not very interesting interactions between the way the spells work. It's just this spell does more damage than smite, so we're going to press it on cooldown during our damage rotation. You know, we've got things like Solace, we've got Mind Blast, we've got Penance, we've got so many of these different smites, but better. They're not very interesting. So, you know, we would prefer, if they're going to bring spells back, that they're doing something different than what the kit already does. You know, not just another damage ability that we have to throw into our rotation.
Yeah, for example, Mind Blast, they brought that back into Shadowlands, and it does very minimal damage because it got immediately nerfed on arrival. For this specifically.
Yeah.
So we'd like that to do a lot more upfront damage or something like that. So when you press it, it feels like you're, you know, doing something different.
It feels so it would feel more impactful for sure. And I personally cannot think of anything that was like super iconic in the past and to be brought back onto the current Discipline Priest. As the boy said, the current iteration hasn't changed that much since Legion. It's more or less like the same. And we can talk about, you know, Discipline Priests having a lot of great cooldowns, right? I mean, Rapture, Dome, you know, Pain Suppress, Grip. So in terms of like the more completeness, I would say, like the finality of the spec, it's looking pretty solid. Don't know what could they, because we can touch on this a little bit. They'll bring tier sets, right? In
they said I think it's pretty much confirmed right now.
Yeah. And I don't know how about you guys, but I'm really having a hard time thinking about what can possibly they can deliver on Discipline Priest, because tier sets should act on specs, right? I know they're for the class, but the bonuses will be for specs. What can possibly they introduce for this priest?
I have a very strong feeling that it's going to be related to penance.
Well, right up the alley.
I'm pretty sure most of the Legion Legion tier sets were also related to penance, right?
Yeah.
Yep. We had a couple situations where we were running 2 different tier sets. We were running a 4-piece, 2-piece, where all of it was related to penance.
Yeah. So probably something around that. Something related to Radiance or Penance, something in those lines. Other than that, I can't think of anything that would actually be really good outside of obvious, just insane overtuning.
I mean, yeah, it would make sense since like, you know, if it happened in the past and we still have the castigation teller, or maybe something that will interact with castigation. I mean, it would still be penance themed.
Be penance again.
Be penance, yeah.
One more bolt.
The last bolt does more damage.
Yeah, so you have
the last bolt this time.
Yeah, but
No.
you can pair it up. You have the first bolt and the last bolt. You know, it's good.
We'll need something in the middle.
Yeah,
or
you
what?
need something. Yeah.
That's what the Covenant legendaries will be. After you mind games, the middle bolts do more damage.
There you go, full circle.
So you basically have like the whole borrowed power system cramped up to make fucking castigation work.
Eventually, the entire penance will do more. We'll get there.
It's a gradual process, but we have been mentioning and talking about things that could be added to the priest to potentially fix issues that either are or aren't there, or to replace or fill in holes to things that Discipline Priest cannot do. But let's talk about something that Discipline can do, and which is actually something that I discussed with Clandon just before starting the episode, because actually we're kind of guilty as well, but I did want to put this out there and clarify the conception that, at least in Mythic Plus, that Discipline Priest is bad in groups that don't know what to do. Because personally, as an average player, just looking at the Discipline Priest and playing it myself, obviously in suboptimally, whenever people fucked up, I felt like I had a harder time getting people back up as with other healers. And obviously this seems to be a misconception about Discipline Priest, because, you know, perfecting the playstyle always circumvents whatever whatever external power you can add to the specs. So I wanted to just put this out there. Maybe we can start about talking about this with Clandon, because one of the things that we do like to talk about whenever we're doing these podcasts is kind of eliminate community perception whenever it's obviously misinformed.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is when you're playing Disc in Mythic Plus, you're very cooldown reliant. You need your cooldowns to cover tough situations, because at the point where Atonement is not enough to heal your group, you have to be using your cooldowns to recover or save anyone. And a lot of times you'll go in a dungeon and you won't know where to press it, so you're holding on to it, you're not using your cooldowns. So when you're playing with a group that you don't know what they do or when, it just adds to that issue. And it's not particularly a discipline itself issue, it's just you need to know when you want your cooldowns to be used.
Yeah, it really comes down to knowledge of dungeon, knowledge of damage intake, etc. We also see a lot of new discipline priests that just, they're kind of in a situation where they're used to playing other healers where they can go in and their just base rotation is enough healing to keep people up. They're not a more cooldown focused, cooldown centric spec where they're not expected to be constantly rotating cooldowns like Disc is. Disc's base healing, we have a level of basic healing that you can do with Atonement, but the bar is set pretty low on that. We kind of have 3 levels of healing. We've got our base Atonement, which is pretty poor. We've got, our cooldown rotation, and then you've got Shadowmen spamming for things that are even higher. So there's kind of this issue where you get people that don't know when to use their cooldowns, or kind of get in the mindset of, oh, well, I can't pop a cooldown on this. It's just a trash pack. What if I need it for later?
I'm guilty of having that mindset as well. So I don't think it's anything new for a spec to require cooldown rotation to be able to perform well. And like you mentioned, when you're putting things into perspective, it does feel like the basic threshold for throughput is maybe a little bit lower on Discipline Priest than it is with other specs. And whenever we're mentioning cooldown rotation, it brings me back to Holy Paladin as well, where Holy Paladin kind of wants to rotate cooldowns, or at least certain types of mechanics, to be able to heal efficiently, and you kind of want to plan them out a little bit more, where I feel like maybe with other specs you're a little bit more reactionary.
That's fine. That's fine. It's like the identity of the healing spec. At the end of the day, it's fine. In line of that, I would ask you guys, because obviously you have much more interactions with new discipline priests coming in and asking questions. Like, what would be like the most quick TP advice you could give for brand new discipline priest players maybe listening or thinking about jumping into discipline priest? Because I know a lot of people are afraid to jump on discipline priest, especially for dungeons.
Probably don't be afraid to use your cooldowns. You do have a lot. You might need to think about where you can apply them. Like, you need to find the right spots to make use of barrier, obviously, because it's not always as useful. But for Rapture, for your Shadow Fiend, for your Covenant ability, you want to use those as much as you can to just have a smoother run throughout, and not just save it for, okay, I don't know, I'm scared of this pack or this boss and I'm gonna save my cooldowns for 5 minutes for some reason. Like, need to use the cooldown, don't be scared to do so. And if Atonement isn't enough, you might need to fall back to Shadowman. Don't be afraid to use it. Exactly. It's not bad, it does decent healing. Especially compared to other specs as well. Shadowman actually does do quite a lot of healing. So don't be scared to use that when it's needed.
Yeah, Shadowman by default is one of the strongest single target spammable heals out of any of the heal specs, especially if you're when you're running TOF. If you have a Twist of Fated buff, Shadowman, it's extremely powerful. So it's definitely not something you need to feel bad about using. It's definitely something that's core to the spec. Like Small was talking about, I've seen logs of people saying, "Help, I'm struggling in M+. Can you look at these?" And they send me a log of their M+ run. And I look through there, and their Shadow Fiend gets used once on each boss, and their barrier never gets dropped, and their Rapture is like 4 casts over the entire 35-minute dungeon. And they're wondering why they're struggling. It's definitely the biggest part. The spec, like we've said multiple times now, is very cooldown reliant in M+.
Yeah. I think we can add to that it would be really helpful, like especially if people are bugging, right? Because this is like the majority of the experienced players have, or new players have, like they go and plug in into groups or whatever. It would be really helpful for people to know the layout and the damage intake of the dungeon, like which pack is more dangerous, right? But which route is more dangerous and stuff like that. Because once you get to know this, it's such a smooth sailing ride for discipline. And this stigma of don't spam Shadowlands because you have to do all your killing through attunement, but it's not the case, especially not now. So
yeah, and the whole disc can't heal mistakes thing that people like to talk about so much. In a lot of situations, you take a Resto Druid, you take a Holy Pally, you take any other healer. Somebody stands in something they're not supposed to be, and they're chunked for 85-90% of their health, and all of a sudden, that's what people are considering mistakes. If you're a disciplined priest in that situation, what's your response to that? Your response to that is to cast a Shadow Mend on them because that's your emergency heal. If you're a Resto Druid and that guy didn't have any hots on him because it was a mistake, so why would you be rolling 10 hots on the guy if he's not supposed to be taking damage? What's your response in that case? You're going to regrow them. You don't have that much of a difference in regards to your response.
We got this a lot, especially on our guides and stuff, because everybody kind of had people that were commenting were like, oh, I'm too afraid to get into this spec, it seems so complicated, because it is different in the sense that it's not your traditional healer. But like I would say that the fascinating thing about Discipline Priest is actually this timing of cooldowns and rolling between your attunement healing. And this is pretty cool to hear from Clandon. It's like the three stages of healing, I would say, right? Because you have your attunement and your cooldown usage, and when Chin hits the fan, spam Shadowlands. Really cool. And it's more or less the same philosophy for a lot of specs. Just don't be afraid to use the cooldowns. If you're not sure, just don't be afraid.
And it's definitely one of our biggest desires in regards to M+ for things that they could give us to improve our experience in M+ would be, we have very little ways to kind of tune the amount of output we have going on. I like to use Resto Druids as a perfect example of, well-designed healing spec in regards to M+, in regards to their mastery. Every hot they put on a single target, their hots get stronger. So they have very easy ways to tune their healing output per target based on the incoming damage. For Disc, we really don't have any ways of doing that. Like I said, with the three levels of healing, you have Atonement, you heal with Atonement until it's not enough, and then you swap to something else. And, a lot of times you're just jumping between these very inflexible levels of healing, and it leads to this situation where it's not as fluid. If you're playing a Resto Druid, it feels much more fluid to tune your output, whereas Disc, it's really not. So, if they were really going to add something to make Disc feel better in M+, it's to give us more levels between Atonement and Shadowman spam, so we don't have these situations where, okay, Atonement's not enough, time to spam this one button for the entire time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really hoping. I think we say this on every episode, but it's wishful thinking. Maybe some of the devs, some of these ideas get to their ears. I don't know how much these days they're reading, forum posts or whatever, because I know a lot of the people that actually care from the community, like Clandon and Hellpriest and Smallpriest or whatever. Over the years, there was like forum posts or whatever and shit like that. I didn't really see a reaction to those, so I'm hoping like in this format maybe some of the people over there can hear, because it doesn't seem like a complicated thing to add, right? Especially for Mythic Plus, because I don't know, do you guys see any issues with Displaced in rating? I don't think so. Maybe I'm missing a point here, but definitely Mythic Plus seems like the most, I would say, hard block for a lot of players, right? When deciding, oh, should I go Disc or should I go Holy?
Well, it's also an interesting comparison between Discipline Priest and Resto Druid, because Resto Druid is, I mean, obviously any healer can do like a baseline amount of throughput when it's needed, but as far as we've been able to tell, Resto Druid has been definitely really well designed for Mythic Plus, and maybe not as well for raids, where BFA maybe was a good example as to why Resto Druid was obviously one of the top performer healers in Mythic Plus until I think they nerfed their passive. Was their mastery, I think, was it in 8.3 or was it in beta for Shadowlands?
Yeah, it was somewhere around there. I think they did a mastery nerf, and then I think it was Sunfire damage nerf.
Oh yeah, Sunfire damage. And the comparison that whenever I try to put Discipline Priest and Restore Druid in the same boat, at least in terms of raids, is that they both rely on prepping for a big intake fight. A lot of healers have this, clearly, but I think Discipline and maybe Restore Druid are the best examples in prepping for a big damage incoming phase, which obviously has to put you into the mentality of, okay, I have to know what's going to happen in order for me to be super efficient. And obviously their kit doesn't change too much when you put them into a Mythic Plus scenario. It's just that obviously the Druid, the Restore Druid scales a little bit better in Mythic Plus scenario, but then Discipline Priest scales maybe a little bit better in raids. So maybe the same type of mentality needs to be applied in Mythic Plus, where okay, I kind of have to be ready for when that moment happens. Obviously you have Atonement and you don't have a lot of the HOTS that you put into, like you said, Clandon, to what was it, to level out your output of healing based on what you need. And obviously you have Atonement and do damage, or either press cooldowns or press Shadow Mend. And
it's a thing where if they were to add something, yeah, sure, they could probably make it work around the ramp up, or prepping for it or whatever, but it definitely needs to feel different, right? Because it's either, I don't know, maybe they can bake it into attunement in some sorts, but maybe something. I always feel like Shadow Covenant would have been a great potential candidate for this, and I know, maybe you guys can correct me, but I know in BFA I don't know if it 8.2 was it or somewhere, Shadow Covenant was used more in Mythic Plus. Maybe they could address that and change it or rework it. What do you guys think? To have like different layer of it.
I think Shadow Covenant has always, even in BFA, has always been a talent that you can play if you feel like it. It helps with healing, obviously. It's not necessary. A lot of people liked it for some specific affixes like Bursting or Grievous, specifically, which I can understand. And I think that's usually a good place for a talent to be, where there are situations where it's better or where it's not better than the alternatives. And kind of down to what you like, and it doesn't make a gigantic difference where you either lose a lot of healing or gain a lot of healing if you pick it or don't pick it. Whereas with this current iteration, just with how awkward it is with the lockout, and also it also has a lot longer cooldown now to compensate for. I think it also gained a bit of healing and doesn't have to absorb anymore, so it just doesn't fill this gap anymore, where in BFA and M Plus you could just hit it to get some spontaneous healing on the whole group real quick. You just can't really do that anymore, because you lock yourself out of applying atonements outside of Shadow Mend, and well, it has a long cooldown also, so you can't just press it whenever.
Yeah, it also got a lot of extra play just because of the fact that it was something people could clearly see on the meters that was doing something. Whereas the competition on that row, it's a passive. It's a damage bake into the rest of our kit. So when you look at your details window at the end of the run, and you look at Shadow Man doing all this healing, and you're like, oh wow, that was a really impactful feel good talent. It's really difficult to see the other side, because Sins of the Many isn't going to show up on your meters. It's just this passive damage that's constantly increasing your healing across the entire run.
Yeah, I think by and large, a bigger part of the problem is that the way they've been tuning Atonement is based on raids. They keep nerfing it down because our output is very potent within raids when we do this burst style healing. But that doesn't transfer across as well to dungeons, so they keep nerfing it that way, and it just adversely affects Mythic Plus. And we don't have any separate tuning tool to increase our output when we want to.
Right, this is why I was saying that Shadow Covenant could potentially be a solution, but not in this form. Like the penalty seems like really too harsh, right? So.
Well, also, I wanted to point out, ever since this is coming from the perspective of someone who dabbles into all of the specs to an extent and to a certain level, and going into Discipline Priest and looking at the last turn, because we did talk about Spirit Shell, and ideally it seems very awkward to balance, and obviously absorbs are maybe arguably the best types of healing that you can do in WoW, at least in the current type of content design. It always felt, the last war always felt a little bit awkward, because Lenience, then I'm talking about Lenience this time.
The actual Lenience.
Lenience was definitely the obvious choice in Mythic Plus. It reduces overall damage taken, and you could argue that Mythic Plus is maybe 30 minutes of pretty much 90% of the time being in combat, more or less, or maybe more than that. So lenience would definitely have a lot of value there. While evangelism was clearly the raid option, it made a lot of sense to have in raid. And then you had what was before? Barrier, exactly. And that felt like, why take that? So it definitely felt like they were trying to say, okay, this is your dungeon, this is your raid, and this is something else.
This is something.
And the something
this is just there to exist.
Something.
And obviously the something else was replaced with Spirit Shell, which is contentious at the very least right now. So if they would replace it, could they replace it with something to affect Mythic Plus? Maybe change it or redo it, or use that slot there to address maybe some of the things that Discipline Priest could be doing a little bit better or taking advantage of in Mythic Plus that maybe other healers have, but Discipline doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest issues in regards to that talent row is, you know, the spec is kind of entirely based around it. In Raid right now, the entire spec is based around the Evangelism playstyle. So much to the point where, you know, the legendary we're using is slapping an Evangelism light onto Spirit Shell. You know, it makes Spirit Shell a slightly worse version of Evangelism, but then you get the positives of it being Spirit Shell. It's very difficult to tune things on that tier while Evangelism exists on that tier, because, you know, for something to be used on that tier in the raid perspective, it has to be of equal or greater power than Evangelism, which is what the entire spec is designed around. So it's just very awkward having Evangelism on that tier from a raid perspective. It does also kind of open up the option to, you know, replace that with a Mythic Plus focused talent, because in most cases we're going to be stuck running Evangelism and raid if you removed Spirit Shell. We would be stuck using Evangelism and raid, so you'd kind of be open to be able to put a stronger talent in that talent tier. That's for low atonement counts, that would be good in M+, that wouldn't necessarily get abused in raid because we're stuck running Evangelism. They definitely have the ability to add something that's good at lower atonement counts on that tier, but, you know, at the moment that would require them to either replace lenience or remove Spirit Shell or Evangelism from that tier. And it doesn't really seem like they're interested in removing Spirit Shell at the moment. And the only way I could see Evangelism being removed is if that would be baked baseline into the class, which, to be honest, it really should be at this point, since the entire raid spec is based around it. It's very tough because the ways that they could make a better 5-man talent tree, talent there, you know, a lot of people like to joke about adding, you know, our PvP talent trinity to the tree, and you know, that would work, but it's not very interesting. It's just kind of you know, I think the better option would be to give separate tuning to M+ than to raid, but I don't think they do that outside of things like Divine Hymn and Trank and stuff like that, do more healing in a 5-man environment. But I definitely think the game in general could benefit from having separate Mythic Plus tuning as opposed to raid, because like Hell said, you know, a lot of our issues is that we're too strong in raid, so we get nerfed in Plus as a result.
Yep.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be something new for them to do, because if you take a Restorer Druid on the opposite side of the spectrum, they did. I don't know when they added this or if this was always a thing, but I don't think that this was always a thing, where they the tooltip for Tranquility definitely says that Tranquility heals more within a raid scenario than within a dungeon, because if they buffed Tranquility too much for it to be efficient in raid, it would obviously over buff it for dungeons. So that wouldn't be something new for them to do, to like affect a specific spell or a talent where it says, okay, if you're in a party, or only if you're not in a raid, this does more healing or more damage reduction or more absorbs or whatever they do. And it also with Evangelism, the Evangelism topic, they've had a history of whenever something became cookie cutter for too long, they eventually added it as a baseline. They do seem to be very
well, they're stubborn about it. They're stubborn about it.
To keep it, but eventually feels like they would end up doing it. And I obviously feel like Evangelism feels so good for the Atonement playstyle, and the way you spread atonements feels like, okay, if I'm in a 20-man group, I kind of want Evangelism.
Of course, yeah. But, you know, Clandon said it pretty clearly, this should have been baseline by now. It's so iconic, it's so there, it's so part of it. I don't understand why it's still a talent, and it would make for the opportunity, because at this point, you know, balancing shit between rating and Mythic Plus could make much more sense, since at this point there's two different entities and two different progression paths and play styles and whatever, it would only make sense for them to do like that and probably resolve a lot of headaches for a lot of specs, not only discipline. A lot of space.
100%, yeah. We've also seen recently they have increased the atonement transfer within PvP separately, so it is on the table.
Would be interesting to see. Although I'm not sure they have the resources. Not resources. Maybe they don't have the scheduling right now to do shit mid expansion. This sounds like something they would do on either at the last patch or on a new expansion.
Well, maybe, but they do have a precedent with 8.1. Right, when they tackled Shadowpriest and Elemental Shaman. So it won't be something necessarily new, although maybe it's not a very good precedent. But then again, if they opt to not make strong balance changes during the middle of the patch, maybe making big changes from a patch by patch.
They're focused on Covenant Legendaries and Torghast, man. I don't know.
There's very little time for specs these days.
A real cruxidation right now.
Yeah, and don't you guys feel that in the past they had more focus on specs? That was the main things. That was like the main thing that would get people excited. Each expansion, each patch, they would not rework but address a lot of specs. Now it doesn't happen. It's just like all these extra shit.
We saw very little going into Shadowlands for Disc. It was just minor tweaks and changes and then all the unpruning. So it was very little, based.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting issue because when you think about it, every other system in the game is experienced through a class. When you're playing WoW, you're playing one of the specs in the game. And it doesn't matter if it's Torghast, PvP, M+, Raid, everything you're doing is through that spec. So you would think it would be more of a higher priority.
Right. I mean, I know we touched on this in previous videos too. They changed their shift towards this external thing. And I get like this is, we're talking, with people who are really, really involved with the spec. Probably the casual crowd doesn't really care that much about all of these discussion, although I wouldn't make the argument that today's WoW, the casual crowd does look up to, limit progression, world first shit, what's meta, all of that, right?
Whenever there's something very competitive and people want to be told what to play, or maybe it's easier than having to do all the research and having to play test, they just look, okay, what are the best people play? And this is obviously creating a community, is creating a misinformed perception of how good a spec is, because whenever we're talking about meta and high-end competitiveness, there's a reason why that works there, because, well, obviously it all starts with the player skill being able to make that be meta at the high end.
Oh, so you're saying player skill makes a difference?
What?
What an interesting concept.
Just the right legendary, man. I just need to bump your legendary to 235 and that's it. What? Learn new spells.
I mean, we can talk about corruptions. I mean...
8.3 didn't happen, man.
Yeah, can we just erase 8.3? I mean, I don't know how it was for healers because I didn't heal that much, but I know the game was playing for you as a DPS multiple times.
I think 8.3 just set a bad example because it raised the floor of throughput of each class to the point where the content became so trivial, where it didn't really matter if you were playing perfect is maybe a little bit too much, but playing optimally at the very least to get the output that you needed.
I can see corruptions in Torghast. That's fine. Don't bring you in the fucking raid, man. Don't give me that 300k crit on Twilight Devastation in PV competitive content, man.
You do say that, but they're adding new conduits in 9.1, right? Or
yeah, there are the new conduits, but they're not that like wow.
And if 9.2, if they add tier sets, will they add new conduits? Is that another layer of player power on top of all of this? That's good.
Tier sets that interact with conduits. Just layer it up.
Conduit energy is staying.
Conduit energy.
Yeah, that's a whole different debacle. Like,
no.
Yeah.
Let's we can go on and on for this, but let me ask you guys if it was something you guys would invent, an ability or something, and maybe we can address more thoroughly through this question the problem with the Mythic Plus situation over there, like the layering stuff that Clandon mentioned. What ability would you guys invent to fix this issue quote unquote issue for discipline in Mythic Plus. We got to that point, right? Remember we talked about this?
Yeah.
We got to that point where
You were forewarned.
yeah. If you were to like invent an ability, right, for discipline priest, what would that look like? You know, broadly. Don't care about balance or anything.
I'd like to bring something that we could either actively increase our healing or damage. So it could even be something like an AoE penance, for just something completely out of
Imagine
out
how
of the blue.
cool would that look like.
Exactly, penance would be going everywhere. And just something you could actively use to increase your healing that wouldn't go crazy in raids. Just something for dungeons that you could enjoy pressing.
Yeah, I think something to give a bit more to help distinguish between active damage phases and active healing phases, because also kind of what we're lacking is the decision making between I want to DPS now and I want to heal now, because well, when we're healing we're also doing most of our DPS rotation anyway, so you'll see a disc that is trying hard to DPS does very similar to a disc that is just playing normally. So we have pretty much only a Shadow Word Death as the only spell that doesn't give any atonement healing, but Shadow Word Death also doesn't like increase our DPS by a significant amount, plus it hurts ourselves, so you really don't actually press it. And I think something along those lines, kind of like what Hal mentioned, where you could decide on what you want to amp right now, your damage or your healing would be great.
I agree with both of what they're saying. You know, we definitely don't have the ability to tune our damage output or our healing output on either side based on the current situation. You know, every single one of our abilities outside of death affects atonement, so the damage of these abilities and is tuned around the healing that they're going to provide. So if we're in a situation where there's not very much healing to go around and we want to just focus on increasing our damage output, don't really have any options. Especially when our large damage spells, like things like Mind Games or Boon, if we're running either of those or anything else, they're so tied into our healing that you can't kind of just toss them out there just because you want to increase your DPS output, because they are your core healing output as well.
All right.
Do you guys think that this could be something that they could use to redesign Shadow Covenant with? I'm thinking maybe in a world where Shadow Covenant would increase shadow damage dealt, but instead of locking you out of holy spells, maybe make them less effective. Would that be bad design towards Discipline Priest, or would that fix something like damage output?
I was more, when you mentioned it, I was more thinking along the lines of just like maybe increasing damage, or like you activate then deactivate, but it just completely turns off atonement healing. So you literally decide, okay, I'm DPSing now, I'm not going for healing, and I also heal passively. I don't know, I'd kind of like that.
Discipline Priest Stance Dancing Edition.
Yeah, I was actually thinking.
We got our own shadow form, I guess.
I was actually thinking, because that reminded me of defensive stance for Arms Warrior, where they just activated, they have like a short little cooldown, but you bring a different damage profile that the Arms Warrior interacts with while that's active, and then you can always deactivate it on will. It doesn't have a cooldown and doesn't like lock you out of specific things.
Yeah, we definitely need something that gives us the ability to, you know, say for the next so many seconds, I want to be focusing on DPS, and then for the next so many seconds, I want to be focusing on healing. But you have to design it in a way that's not just going to be yet another button you toggle. You know, you don't want the situation where you keep the DPS one on during your downtime, and then when healing goes bad, you just toggle to the other, and it just becomes this boring toggle that you're hitting back and forth.
True.
So it needs to be designed in some sort of interactive way where it's affecting your decision making throughout the play, instead of just being this button you're pressing. So the actual implementation of it would be a little bit more difficult, but it definitely something along the lines of being able to tune your damage or healing output based on situation.
Yeah, that could be an interesting thing, because we have been talking a little bit about healer damage, and we're obviously getting a lot of comments where people are like, I just want to heal, I don't want to do damage. Okay, that's fine on non-disciplined priest specs, that makes sense, but with how Atonement works and how Disciplined Priest works, I mean, that's kind of a thing. And if you don't like Disciplined Priest, you always have Holy. Yeah. And obviously there's the whole Holy Paladin debacle, where Holy Paladin is so ridiculous now with Venthyr, where there's not a choice to do more damage and or a choice to do more healing, because they go hand in hand, and that kind of felt like it was always supposed to be like a Discipline Priest thing. But then again, turning Discipline Priest into another Holy Paladin where you just deal more damage than an Outlaw Rogue is also a little bit silly.
Yeah, and definitely
Yeah.
just opportunity costless DPS in general across healers is an issue. You don't really want to ever, Disc is the DPS to heal class. So there's going to be some level of opportunity costless DPS, but you don't ever want a situation where there's such a significant amount of opportunity costless DPS, like from Holy Pallies right now, where just doing their normal healing rotation, dropping Ashen Hollow, doing their Crusader Strikes and Hammer of Wraths, etc. They're doing such an ungodly amount of healing or such an ungodly amount of damage just for free, just by playing their healing rotation.
Yeah.
And that's always going to cause an issue. And really, the solution is going to be to either tune that back to the point where you have to be making active decisions to do DPS and spend globals to do DPS like that, or to eventually give it to everyone. Which way that people want is up to Blizzard, but.
Homogenization, that was the word we kept on going for.
I mean, I always
podcast.
hated that type of mentality when addressing, because I want my spec to feel special, but then again we end up in situations where my spec doesn't bring anything to the raid as a raid buff, so I'm not getting
That's the thing, man. There's things that make specs unique, like discipline. It was always like this, right? And there's more broader stuff that could make specs a little bit more homogenized, right? Like we ain't gonna get into the raid buffs and anything like that, because I think we talked a lot about it. It's the raid
common topic.
Yeah, it is at this point, and but again, we talked about this at the beginning of the podcast, right? Whereas discipline is basically, this is the core of the spec, right? You deal damage and heal through that. It's fine. But right now, as it stands, if you're a holy paladin, you're kind of expected to bring that level of ridiculousness through being Vantir and all of that. And it's I don't feel that's the right direction necessarily. Like if you're expected to do damage, and especially as Clandon put it, it's so free. It's like you don't make a huge decision. Oh, right. It's just, okay, I'm just going to do my shit in this big red puddle and it's going to be fine. We can go back and forth with this, and there's a lot more stuff to cover for sure. And we'll definitely, if the boys are down, we're definitely going to do another episode after 9.1 releases, and we'll see the legendaries for discipline maybe, and a couple of other things, and cover more ground. But I think this was pretty educational, and I'm hoping, especially for this person, I'm hoping people start to lose this bullshit ass community perception about it. Don't be afraid to use your cooldowns. Learn a bit your dungeons, and you'll be fine. If you're not pushing plus 20 keys, it's all good, right?
Maybe discipline is just a more difficult spec, and that's fine. And it's different.
The main thing is you just want to make sure you're enjoying playing it, and if you're not, that's fine.
With that being said, I think we can close it off with this. First of all, thank you so much, Clandon, Priest Hope, and Smallpriest for joining. If you guys want to check out the boys, the first place to look for is the Warcraft Priest Discord. There's also the warcraftpriest.com with a lot of useful information there. And if you boys have Twitches, Twitch accounts, Twitters,
something with T.
Yeah, if you guys just write them down, we'll put them in the description. So people can interact over there. I cannot not recommend enough the Warcraft Priest Discord. It's basically where I learn, to play decently this priest.
It's the same here. It was very nice coming across the website. Like, people actually do this for the class. This is so nice.
Yeah, it's amazing. Then that being said, thank you so much for watching or listening, depending which platform. Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, watching on YouTube for the video. We have these episodes on the specs every Monday, so make sure to tune in then. Thank you for watching, listening. Have a great week.
See you in the next episode next Monday.
Still I play WoW.